Hello everyone, my name is Rami Abouemira, and tonight I'm basically going to be hosting and emceeing and kind of walking us through tonight's event. Really excited for the topic, to kind of explore the human rights crisis that's going on in this region of the world. But first, before we get into that, I definitely want to send like major thank you to ICNYU. So if we can give them a round of applause, that'd be awesome. Obviously, we're in their space. For those that don't know, this is a prayer room. And those who don't also know that ICNYU is a huge staple in the Muslim community, especially for, I guess the younger generation, at least that's from my perspective. There's a lot of, open conversation here, open thoughts, and a lot of great dialogue that happens in this space, not only here, but they kind of house a couple of floors in this religious building. So I'm really grateful that they, saw the value in this topic and decided to sponsor it. So I just want to send major kudos to them. So, like I mentioned before, my name is Rami Abouemira, and why am I, even interested in this topic in the first place? What brings me to this podium, speaking to all of you? So, I feel like since, for some time now, I turn on the news, I hear China this, China that. Coronavirus, then I hear about the Muslim population in China, suffering through this and experiencing that. And I heard all these buzzwords and I was just kind of getting confused and kind of flabbergasted in all of it because none of it was really tangible. And also, I felt a lot of grief because personally I am Muslim. So, I might not be connected to them tangibly, physically, go to school with them, work with them, but I still feel a spiritual connection with them. So, of course, I wanted to move to action, but I didn't really know how to do that. So I guess I was just kind of waiting for the right opportunity to do that, and kind of from my perspective, this is the best way I can, make action of this and take action upon it. So, spreading awareness, having these kind of, thorough conversations that need to be had, and just, shedding light on really intense realities that are going on for, brothers and sisters and folks just all around the world. So that's just a bit about me, and going through, just to give you guys a heads up on what we're expecting tonight, you should have, of course, already seen the agenda on the Eventbrite page, but in case you haven't, we're going to do 3 presentations and then a panel, and then after that, we're going to break for dinner. And we got some great food from a Uyghur restaurant in Queens, so I'm excited for that. Don't know about you. Yeah, claps for food, yeah. And just a heads up, so we're actually going to ask folks not to take photos or videos of the speakers, and let's just assume some of the audience members might not want to be photographed as well. And the context around that is maybe it's not that they don't have a good hair day or something, but really they need to protect their identity. So there's folks here who are Uyghur, and what that might mean for them is that these photos can very easily be tracked. Their identities can very easily be identified, and that can be sent back to a place that doesn't have the best intention with that data and information. So we're just going to ask kindly if folks can be really cognizant of the documentation they're taking tonight. And also, just out of respect for all of the audience members' time and then the presenters' time, you might have seen already in the Eventbrite page that we have a Google form, so we're going to be actually asking folks. I'm sure there's so many amazing minds here. Obviously, if you came to this room, you're willing to have a really engaging conversation and be part of something great. But we just want to respect the time, and in that sense, we're going to be asking folks to just submit questions to that form. So it's already set to specify questions for individual speakers, for the panel, and the way for you to do that is just going to be going through the Eventbrite page. Scrolling down to number 4 on the list there, on the venue guidelines, and then just opening up the link. If you don't have a smartphone, I please ask that you ask someone next to you to use their phone, and hopefully they'll be nice and kind and let you use their phone for just a hot second. And also, this is where you'll submit feedback after the event. So I think that's just about it for now. So I want to do the great honor of introducing our Uyghur Tailor tonight, Aia Roi. And she'll be speaking to you all about the history and context of Uyghurs in the region. Cool.
Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for being here tonight to address the importance of our discussion today, which is China's erasure of the Uyghurs. I'm going to start with the history of the region and its people, but before I want to say I'm one of the contributors speaking out on this crisis because I myself, as an Uyghur individual, who was born and raised in Uzbekistan and migrated to New York, where I define home. As we speak at this moment, Uyghurs are detained in concentration camps, and where home for my people became a genocide by the central government in China. The attempt of erasure of a rich culture and a great long tradition is something we can't consider as moral. And my relatives are one single digit out of over 1 million Uyghurs and other minorities imprisoned. So let's start. History of Uyghurs. So who are the Uyghurs? Do you guys even know how to pronounce Uyghur? So let's try it. We're going to say Uyghur. One more time. Uyghur. You got it. All right, awesome. So Uyghurs are Muslims of Turkish descent and are traditionally rooted within Central Asian culture, especially along the transcontinental trade route through the Silk Road. And this explains why this culture has so much exchange of religion and tradition of their past practices of Buddhism, Sufism until the 10th century, when the time Islam has arrived to the Karahanate Kingdom, which is the capital city of Kashgar, where the center of Islam and tradition have really thrived. So moving on to Muslims in China, which is known as East Turkestan, which you know as Xinjiang Autonomous Region. So migration routes are really important to understand the historical background of cultural exchange and descendants of Muslims in this region, especially through the Middle East and Central Asia. So during this time, the Uyghur state from 1744 till 1840 was among the earliest established by Turkic peoples and from a major milestone in the development of Turkish civilization, which is the Karabalgasun, which was located in the High Orkhon River, which is now known as the Republic of Mongolia. So you could really imagine the long, rich history that we have gone through as people. And going back to past trading routes, these are important parts to really look into the political and social changes that really impacted the Chinese population, but also during the Mongol conquest and the East and Central Asia during the Genghis Khan conquest. So migration and transportation were a really important part of this place, and a formation of the Mongol aristocrats. So another viewpoint to look into, which is very important. In juxtaposition with the past, it's interesting to see the mass development of present trading routes, because the reason why the crackdown is actually happening in Xinjiang is this is mass campaign of repression against Uyghurs. The tensions have been exacerbated because of this unlawful incarceration of Muslims living in the region. So the Belt and Road Initiative is the central point of this action taken by the government to ensure secure, strict measures with high-tech surveillance on Uyghurs and other minorities in the region. So, money comes first, and this is all a business tactic by the Chinese government. And it's actually known as vocational education centers that they have set up, but in reality, it's just pure concentration camps. So to continue the timeline from the Mongol conquest, so Muslim population came after the Mongols in terms of hierarchy and power. So you could really imagine the power that Muslims had at the time. And as follows, the Ming Dynasty was the permanent settlement of Muslims in China. So following down to the Manchus conquering China in 1644, the same time Muslim minorities were seen as rebellious and separatist groups. And to define separatism for you, especially the rebellion after Yakubek, where regions around Kashgar were made as an independent state. So this was the peak time where Uyghurs had gained independence, but seen as separatism. And to define separatism for you, it's a belief and movement for a state of separation. And a great example that is placed here, NBC News, teens, young adults are using TikTok to raise awareness for Uyghur Muslims. Shout out to that girl, she did a great job because that's what we need right now. 1884, a very important date, when the Manchu Empire invaded the nation and annexed East Turkestan into its territories and renamed it Xinjiang, known as the New Territory, on November 18th in 1884. So let's not forget these dates because this is where history marks itself. So 1930 till 33 is when the independence of Muslim states had a brief time, and then as East Turkestan Republic. And 1940 till 44 was the same time that this shortly establishment of independence had occurred but then the PRC by the Chinese government party in 1949 took over. So that was a lot, for sure. But to summarize it all, I want you guys to understand the complexities of the new territory, East Turkestan, the homeland of Uyghurs in Central Asia. And historically, East Turkestan is a part of Central Asia, and the people are not Chinese, but of Turks of Central Asia. And to end off, I want to say thank you for listening. And you might be wondering what this recurring image represents. It's rooted within myself as a tailor, and it carries a larger identity of an immigrant and my adornment to craft and tradition from my culture as being Uyghur. And from the start, I questioned the significance of such a craft, because how can I implement and bridge a dialogue between my craft and through community work? And my goal was through the power of passing down knowledge in different forms of expression, as this is the true power of knowledge and exchange of information. And I came to the realization, for me, the vessel is this image, which has no face, but a message, finding oneself in the new territory, response to Tailor politics. Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, like, that's really important to just see kind of the value of putting a face to the culture, to the history, because I feel like I never heard anything that she just said before, and that's really important for me and valuable for me. Just quick reminders again, if you do have questions for her, please submit it through the forum. If you've just walked in, feel free to flow in, but also just keep the corners on both sides of the room open so that people can pray if they prefer to. So I'm really honored to introduce our next presenter. So Lisa Ross is an amazing artist who's worked side by side with the Uyghur population in East Turkestan for a very long period of time, and was able to document something that you just wouldn't be able to get. It just, her lens is just so raw, and it's so, in your face, and it's just, I really loved it. I really loved it. The photo that everyone's going to see soon about with the young boy. I'm really excited for that one. So please, without further ado, I'd love to introduce Lisa Ross to the podium and have her walk us through this artistic journey.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, and thank you, Uyghur Tailor, Rami, Jessica. Salam alaikum. That would get you arrested or put into a detention center if you were in East Turkestan. It's now forbidden to approach people on the street, as it always has been, and say salam alaikum. Yak Shemsis for all the Uyghurs that are here today. Okay, I'm just going to show you a quick video. My name is Lisa Ross. This is my passport. I'm a U.S. citizen. My passport number is 5616-47977. This is an appeal for my friend Rahila Dawood. Rahila was born in Urumqi. She's 53 years old. Urumqi is part of Xinjiang, Uyghur Autonomous Region, also known as the Uyghur homeland. On December 4th, Rahila went to Beijing for a conference, 2017. She never returned. Her family, her friends, her colleagues, her students, nobody's heard from her since. Rahila is one of over 1 million Uyghurs that have disappeared since 2017. And this is an appeal to the Chinese government to free Rahila. I met Rahila in 2004 at the University of London at a conference on Uyghur culture and history. We traveled together in 2005, visiting many Uyghur holy sites. We lectured together at UC Berkeley, where she was a visiting scholar. And she visited me in New York City after she attended a conference at Cornell University. Rahila inspired so many students who went on to study in the US, in Canada, in the EU. She believed in the value of travel and the education of travel and seeing the world. and she believed in coming home. Rahila's mission was to show how Uyghur holy sites are an expression of so many different religions and traditions. Rahila traced practices at the sites to Manikism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Nestorian Christianity, shamanism, and more. Rahila wanted to show that Uyghur Islam was far from any kind of extremist belief or behavior. For her PhD thesis, Rahila published a book on Uyghur holy sites. This is the book. There are about 100 sites recorded in this book. It was published in Uyghur and Chinese. Months before meeting Rahila, I was able to use her book alongside historian Alexander Pappas. We visited over 25 sites in the summer of 2004. As a result of Rahila's work, as an artist, I was able to publish a book of photographs of the holy sites and share them with many audiences around the world. Rahila was working with the Chinese government to promote Uyghur culture for tourism and understood through a great deal of fieldwork how valuable and rich Uyghur culture is. I experienced that firsthand. It changed my life. Rahila was one of the first women to receive a PhD, one of the first Uyghur women to receive a PhD, and is certainly one of the hardest working people I know. She also knows how to enjoy and celebrate life. Rahila loved to laugh and joke. Anyone that knows Rahila knows how much she loves coffee. This is an appeal to the Chinese government to set Rahila Dawood free. She's so valuable to so many people and has changed in the most positive ways so many lives, including mine. Please set her free for her family, for her friends, for her daughter, for her mother, for her students. Rahila's wisdom and knowledge is valuable for all of humanity.
That video that I just shared is a testimonial that a lot of friends of Uyghurs, family of Uyghurs, are creating to speak out and let the Chinese government know that this is not okay and that we want our family members and friends released. So this is, at the end, you may say, what can we do? This is something you can do, and I can tell you more about that later. On my way here, a friend sent me a text from Senegal, and she said, life is a gift, so live every day as a thank you note. And I just want to dedicate this short, hopefully short talk to Rahila and thank her, because everything that you will see now is due to the work that she did as an ethnographer in the region. And because she was so active in recording the culture, that is the reason that she's been disappeared. So I just want to say that. I'm going to try and be quick. Okay, so 2002, I was invited to China because a friend was shooting Kill Bill in Beijing, and they invited me to come to the set. It was shortly after 9/11, and prior to that, I'm actually Jewish, and so I'm really grateful to be invited into this house of worship, and I thank you for that. And I did my own, I wanted to learn for myself a lot of the myths that I had heard. So I went to North Africa in 1999, 2000, and 2001. And then 9/11 happened, and a lot of my work had been done in North Africa. And so when I went to China, I hadn't, like many of you, heard of the Uyghurs before, but I read about this region when I was there, and I was like, that's where I'm going. And I took a 4-day train out there. And I don't speak Mandarin. I'm now taking a Uyghur language class, but I didn't speak it at the time. So it was kind of like intense travel because I was traveling alone, and I really wanted to go into the desert. I read ancient city ruins in the desert landscape. But I had this, I did find the ancient city ruins, but I had a driver who's Hui, which is Chinese Muslim. And he saw the kind of places that I was interested in. So he took me to the edge of the desert, and he just kind of pointed in. And I slowly walked in and saw these different colors in the landscape, and I thought, wait, what is this? I'm a photographer, I'm an artist, but I'd never seen anything like this before. It was, as you all know, the desert is like an outrageously spiritual place just to start with, but then suddenly to see these flags blowing in the wind, animal skins, wooden cribs cresting the sand dunes, I was ready to faint because I was like, what's happening? What is this? And so with all the hard, like challenging travel I did, there was a moment where I just heard this like voice, inner voice or whatever, could be God, say, this is why you're here. This is why I brought you here, and you'll be back. And so even though I really didn't know like where I was, how I got there, I just left and I thought, I guess I'll be back. And I've been back to this site 5 times. What I learned over the years that I traveled in the region, I worked both with a historian of Central Asian Islam, young Frenchman that I met while traveling, and I also worked with Rahila Dawood and her students. So every year that I went, I would travel with either the historian, the ethnographer, or her students. And so we had this really interesting exchange where they started seeing so differently traveling with me, and I learned about what it was that I was seeing. So it's a really interesting way to work. The holy sites, during the 10 years from 2002 until only recently, were so actively used. And so I just will give you a few notes about these places. This place is called Sultanim Mazar, and it's at the edge of a farming village in the desert. And so at the bottom, this is about 50 feet high, and at the bottom of the marker is a tomb for a saint. So it was the Sufis that did most of the conversions in this region and had a huge effect. So that's why we have the cult of saints and pilgrimages to all over this region. And often people want to bury their family members close to the tomb of the saint because it's believed the saint is in a state of eternal sleep and helps the deceased transition into the afterlife. So on Fridays after mosque, people will often go out to the cemeteries or the holy site and pray not only to the saint and their family members, but also to the whole community, for the wellness of the whole community. Sometimes it's not a saint, but actually there's so much history to this region in terms of different religions that they still kind of exist in these holy sites. So sometimes it might be a tree where a miracle might have occurred. So often people forget what the actual history of a place is, and it becomes more about what it heals and why you go there than the history. Water is also considered holy in certain places. So at this site, when you actually get to the main part of the site, there's turquoise water that's bubbling out of a hillside, and people go there and they drink the water. But before they go on the pilgrimage, they go into these ritual bathing huts and wash their feet and their hands before they start the pilgrimage. So depending on the geography, the holy sites change physically, how they're marked and what they look like. This is a more ancient way of marking burials. Even when the photographs just show burials, there's still a place in the area for the saint's marker. And often women are not allowed to go to mosques, or haven't been allowed to go to mosques in this region. So they actually were very active in the holy sites. So this holy site is called Imam Jafar Sadiq, which might sound familiar to some of you. And this holy site was specifically used for fertility, where one would go when they were having trouble with fertility. And there were also these gates. And, well, if you've been in New York a long time, there was an art installation in Central Park by Christos of gates. I don't remember what year it was, but at this holy site, there are 11 gates that you walk through symbolically until you get to the doorway of the tomb of the saint. And often the markers are, I don't know if you can see it because it's kind of bright in here, but very ethereal. And so it requires, and very fragile, that people frequently go and visit their family members to keep marking their burials. Also very specific to this region, at many of the holy sites, you'll find dolls. So women will meet with shamans or bakshi, and they will say, okay, your child is sick or you're having trouble. Why don't you make a doll? You wave it over the child. And then take it to the tomb of the saint and pray there and leave it there. So there are a lot of dolls. They're called korchak. There's also, this is a hearth, so it's like a fireplace. And women will do this to pray for domestic harmony. And this is for love. So you'll put two stones together and tie it with a string. Maybe you're having trouble in your relationship. Maybe you want someone to love you. And so you tie two rocks together. Now, people have said to me, this is not Islam. But this is the practices that have been done for centuries in this region. So that is how people see them, identify themselves. This is Rahila Dawood, the person that I told you about. And I just want to read a quote by her about her work. My interest in Mazar stems from the fact that they have existed in the Taklamakan Desert for centuries. With field work, I am able to map the landscape of the Uyghurs. The shrines are evidence of Uyghur identity expressed through material culture and spiritual culture. Most important, this is where people come to clean their soul. It is our history and a way of life that we must preserve. If one were to remove these material artifacts and the shrines, the Uyghur people would lose contact with the earth. It would no longer be theirs. They would no longer have a personal, cultural, and spiritual history. After a few years, we would not have a memory of why we live here or where we belong. That's why I feel I must record the history of these shrines. So if or when things change or disintegrate, I can show our history and where my ancestors lived. I have visited and recorded most of the shrines that are still in existence. And this is the book that Rahila published for her PhD work. There are 86 different shrines in the region. It tells you a little bit about their history, kind of where they are, why you would go there. And there are little photographs and drawings. And getting a copy of this book before I met Rahila I carried it with me for an entire summer. We visited 25 different sites. So when she and I met, and she saw my photographs and her book, she couldn't believe it. And I also had been carrying this picture of her, so it was quite magical to meet. Rahila taught me and was very adamant about not making political work. And she would say, like, you make your photographs, do not make political work. And I also was careful not to put people in my photographs. On one hand, the photographs are large in scale, so when you stand in front of them, you're looking at the marker, and I wanted you to have the experience of the kind of awe that I had when I was in these holy sites, and that is present, I believe. So I didn't want you to look at a person looking at the thing, so the body of work that I created was without the human figure in it. However, I did make a lot of photographs, and I just want to share a few of them to give you a feeling of what it was like just a few years ago when people were allowed to practice what they're no longer permitted to practice. So this is a zikr that happens after on Friday after mosque, people will go back to the holy site, men and women separate, and it goes on. They invited us, actually, which was a big surprise to me. And we stayed for an hour, but it goes on for hours and hours and hours. This gives you an idea of scale. This is something that was starting to happen that Rahila was really torn about, which was Chinese businesses were turning the holy sites into tourist sites. So you would come and buy some happy Chinese ribbon, happy writing in Chinese ribbons, and go to the holy site. And well, it sort of lost its relationship to Uyghurs, and also it was expensive. It's expensive to get in, so people could not go there anymore. But on a positive note, the pilgrimage that ended in the pilgrimage that Rahila invited me to come in May so I could experience, you have this it's a festival, so you had like tightrope walking and magicians, there were storytellers and musicians, there were food stalls. It was such an amazing event. They had Turkic Mongolian wrestling matches that went on all day. And then people would take the walk into the desert. And they would pass by all the markers. The camels are actually like, you could take a camel ride into the desert to the tombs of the saint. And there are many markers for important people along the way. Saints are people that are often, maybe they cured illness while they were alive, maybe they were great poets, maybe they were great spreaders of Islam. So there are many reasons that someone would become a saint, but they are realized when they're alive. Also, you have, I think it's Akash, if I'm saying that right, lovers of God. So people, they're dervishes that have renounced their life, and they are also all along. And this gives you an idea of what happens when you come to the holy site. The Chinese writing is because all of the sites are controlled by the government, but still it was very active, carefully controlled but active. And people would stay overnight, the night before, the night of. It was once a week during the month of May, every Thursday. So after Rahila's disappearance, there were so many scholars that she had affected, so many people that she had helped, that the New York Times published an article about her. And I was invited to show photographs of portraits that I had made in Turkestan, where people in the summertime put their beds out because it's so hot. So they sleep in front of their homes, on rooftops, out in the fields. And when I first went to Turkestan, I photographed some beds, and when I got home, I was like, what are these empty beds in the landscape? So I went back to find those like 2 beds, and as it turned out, there were beds everywhere. So for years, I just photographed empty beds, and then eventually, I began photographing people with their beds. So I was asked to show this work, which was really hard for me to do because of what was happening in the region, and I was like, oh, these are beautiful photographs of people. I mean, I did end up choosing certain images, but I wanted to speak about what was happening. So what I ended up doing was taking the photographs of Rahila, a few that I had made while we traveled together and she was doing her field work, and I created a mural of these photographs. So when you entered the gallery, you would read the article, you would notice that the photo, if you were paying attention, matches the photo in the mural. And so the colored photographs were hanging on the black and white mural. And it caused people, like, you had to say what's going on, why are these photographs here? And the exhibition was called I Can't Sleep, Homage to a Uyghur Homeland, because, well, I literally couldn't sleep when I was putting this exhibition together because I was so torn about what everything meant. And I co-founded with Mukadas Majid, who is a Uyghur ethnomusicologist, dancer, musician, filmmaker, super talented person, and she came, we've done a number of projects together. We co-founded a collective called the Asman Collective that is specifically to create work around what is happening right now and speak about the atrocities. And so she created 5 performative interventions in this space honoring disappeared scholars, musicians, poets, and for each person she created a different performance. And we had, and she either danced, sang, we had musicians in the space. And there's a collective of Uyghur graphic designers called Sulu Collective, and they created, these were posters and stickers of disappeared, this is a poet, Chemagul Awut, Perhat Cherson is a writer, and this is just a quick minute of her performance. In So the line that's repeated in this poem is, "Do you know that I am with you?" And that is why she chose that line to repeat over and over. This is a 3-minute piece that I produced for the New York Times of 3 young people, the daughter of Rahila and 2 other young people. All of them came to the U.S. to study. All of their parents have been disappeared into the camps, or they've gotten prison sentences. So it's a 3-minute piece of them just sharing what happened.
Last time I talked with my mom was December 31, 2017. My mom told me, don't try to contact with us, we will contact with you.
He said, let's talk next time, let's talk next time. That was last time we ever talked to my father.
She left a message over the WeChat saying that she's going to Beijing. That's the last message she left for me.
Almost everyone that I know was taken into camps. It felt like our entire social circle was just evaporated like that overnight.
My friend told me my parents are studying, but I know the word studying means relocation camp. In the one night, I lose everything.
It's torturing me of not knowing whether my mother is alive or not. I don't know what she is eating right now. I don't know what she is doing right now. Does she have enough clothes? Does the people inside of the camp or detention centers are torture her?
More than a year after my father's arrest, we received the news that he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. They fear that Uyghur people learn their own culture too much, and they fear that we have this kind of ethnic pride.
And then they don't even give a reason, just because they are the Uyghur Muslim.
I feel scared, like I had nightmares of me being sent to China and got caught up into the detention centers.
Instead of being a normal human being, I was forcefully turned into a political being. When I feel homesick nowadays, the best thing I think I can do is to try to do something to help my father, try to do something to help millions of Uyghurs that are locked up in concentration camps.
People who watching this video, please call your senators, ask U.S. government to help the Uyghur peoples. It's not the re-education camp, it's the jail.
Thank you.
Well, you can't really cut gold, I guess, right? You got to show it. If we could squeeze in from the sides into more of like the middle of the room on both sides, just to make sure we have space for everyone to come in. Again, just keeping the corners open, so corners on both rooms, just in case people want to pray. And again, I'm sure your minds are racing, a lot of questions, really beautiful imagery shown. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the forum. And so I'd love to introduce Jessica Batke. So she is currently a senior editor at ChinaFile. So she's pretty much an expert in China's domestic and political affairs. So she's worked in the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research as an analyst for nearly 8 years before this role. So to say that she is familiar with politics would be probably an understatement. So she has a really interesting lens on all of this. So without further ado, I'd love to invite her to the podium.
Sit next. Great. It's not up there, though. Oh, there it is. Thank you very much for having me, to you, Rami, and to everybody who's come tonight. We've just heard a lot from very personal viewpoints about what's happening. My task right now tonight is to try to synthesize that as quickly as possible and give you the real nuts and bolts of what is happening in the Uyghur region, and perhaps more importantly, why is it happening? I'm going to do that really quickly. Again, this is probably going to come a little bit fast and clinical, but there'll be time for questions afterwards. I'm going to give you the nuts and bolts, the contours of what's happening. I'm going to talk a little bit about the evidence that we have for this. This is a question that comes up a lot, but how do we know? Turns out there's a lot of ways we know. Look a little bit at what countries around the world and other international groups have they been responding to the crisis. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about why this is happening, although I left the question mark up there because at some fundamental human level, there really is no good reason why this is happening, and I just want to acknowledge that here. The campaign is not just against Uyghurs, it's also against Kazakh, Kyrgyz, and other ethnic minorities that live in this region, in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. And a lot of it is because they're ethnic minority and because they're Muslim. What does this campaign consist of? What does it actually do to the human beings involved? Involves forcible confinement, whether that's in a camp or a prison or another place. We'll talk a little bit about that. It involves forcible changes to religious, cultural, and social practices. It can mean that you are separated from your family, and it can mean, no matter what, it definitely means that you're under constant surveillance in your daily life. And the ultimate goal of this campaign is to change how people identify themselves and how they publicly perform that identity. And so instead of being a Uyghur first, the Chinese government would like people to be a Chinese citizen first. And the word that they use for this is 中华民族. It literally means like the Chinese race. Okay, so let's talk about this first thing, which is forcible confinement. This can happen in a number of different ways. As a lot of you have heard, I'm sure, there's 1 million or more people that are being held in what the Chinese government euphemistically calls re-education camps. These places can involve sexual abuse, they can involve torture, they can involve malnourishment. People die in these camps. That's not in every case. There's a wide variety of kind of ways you can be treated in a camp, depending on what camp you're in and where you are and what your supposed infraction is. No matter what, any camp that you are incarcerated in will involve you having to sing songs praising the Communist Party, listen to speeches by the General Secretary Xi Jinping, and so on. And if you're wondering what gets someone locked up in one of these camps, this is a list that Human Rights Watch put together and that Foreign Policy published. I'm not going to go through all of it, but maybe you can see a little bit of it. Having a full beard, praying. I mean, just completely random things that should not end up with anybody being confined anywhere. In addition to these camps, there are hundreds of thousands, at least, Uyghurs and other ethnic minority Muslims in regular prisons, so in the normal justice system. What's really important to know here is that the population of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region is less than 1% of the population of all of China. And yet, in 2017, it made up more than 20% of the population in their jails. And then there's this surplus labor transfer program. This is different from the camps and the prisons. It is nominally voluntary, although it's not usually actually voluntary. You kind of get voluntold that you are going to be now getting a great new job. It often involves you being moved far from your home. You are often denied permission to go back home. So while you may not be subject to the same privations that you would be in a camp or a prison, you still are not free to kind of do what you want and move about the region as you would like. But then there's all these things that are happening to people who are not being forcibly confined. And this is happening to every single member of society in this place, right? There's constant surveillance. And this can be technological, right? So this can be what we've all seen, these very scary pictures of facial recognition that are the cameras that are all over blanketing the streets. This can be your phone being used to track you, your phone being used as a microphone to listen in on you. This can be trackers that are actually put physically on people's cars so they can monitor where people are driving. And then there's human surveillance, good old-fashioned human surveillance. There's tons of these police stations. They're called convenience police stations, put up everywhere. People are forced to report on each other. There are door-to-door checks. And also the Chinese government will send people to go live in your home with you, called relatives. They will come to your village and they will stay in your home for several days at a time. They will question your children about you and report back on what you're doing in your home. And both of these technological, digital, and human surveillance techniques kind of come together. I'm obviously not going to go through this whole slide, but there's this whole complicated platform and point system where all this information, both from the digital surveillance and the human surveillance, gets integrated together and you are given a score on a scale of safe to not safe. The campaign also involves banning and restricting certain behaviors, and that includes religious and cultural practices. So like we were talking about before, praying, fasting, dress and grooming, so having a long beard, maybe having too long of a dress. It also involves enforcing and promoting certain behaviors that they would like to see. So that could be speaking Chinese, performing songs, patriotic songs. So the top picture up there is a propaganda poster showing that you shouldn't get married in a religious ceremony. You should go and get married, like in the official, what is it, Justice of the Peace? I don't remember what it's called. And then the one on the bottom is people, being voluntold to take part in a large dance. Also really importantly, and this gets back to Lisa's work, part of this campaign involves destroying traditional structures and spaces. In the last year or two, we've seen massive destruction of mosques, of shrines. This is a picture of a shrine. Actually, you can see it was destroyed sometime in the last year or two. Of neighborhoods and of other public spaces that the Uyghurs either traditionally used or were part of their daily life. And all of this really leads to a breaking of social and community bonds. When people are forced to report on each other and families are separated apart, this is causing a large trauma to society on a massive scale across generations. So how do we know this is happening? Well, first of all, because the Chinese government told us so. So anybody who questions that this is happening has to explain a large raft of documents produced by the Chinese government. Some of these are for internal consumption. So a lot of how we discovered where these camps were initially is because the Chinese government was writing out these procurement documents. So they were saying, we need to build a camp. We need someone we can contract with to come and build this facility. And they would put the latitude and longitude in the document, and they would say what they needed to build it for. And then we were able to look it up on satellites and verify, hey, look, they did put this thing up. They're calling it an education center, but it has barbed wire and watchtowers on it. That's interesting. There's also a whole different set of leaked public policy documents that talk about how you should manage the camps. This particular page is talking about how you manage students who are coming home from college and wondering why their parents are gone. And there's propaganda, other propaganda photos and documents that we have, especially early from the campaign, where they were not trying to hide what was happening in these camps. We've already talked about this a little bit. Satellite imagery is also an excellent way for us to show what's happening. You can both see the features of what is called a school, but is not like a school because it has razor wire fences and watchtowers. You can also see camps expanding or contracting, someone recently did a study showing light usage, which you can see from satellites, to be able to tell roughly like whether these camps are expanding or contracting. We have on-the-ground reporting. So this is harder and harder to do, especially as I don't know if any of you heard, but a bunch of Wall Street Journal reporters got kicked out of China yesterday. Several of them were people that have really done a great job reporting on this crisis. But the on-the-ground reporting we've been able to get has been invaluable. And then finally, there's witness testimony. So some people have made it out of these camps, and they have made it abroad, and they have testified. And a lot of the testimony is mutually corroborating. It'd be very hard for this to be made up by several people. Okay, so how is the international community responding? There's a spectrum. And not every country stays at the same place in the spectrum. People can move to different spaces. On one side, where the Chinese government would least like foreign countries to be, is public condemnation. And I use the United States as an example here, not because I think the United States has done the best possible of all jobs. We definitely have not. We could be doing a lot more. But we have been the most vocal publicly, most consistently over time. There's a couple of other countries who also have made statements, like Canada and Germany. Moving further down the spectrum are countries like Kazakhstan, who don't want to say anything publicly, but they are willing to go to bat with the Chinese government behind closed doors. And in this case, they were able to get 2,000 people released from China, and they get to move to Kazakhstan and become Kazakh citizens. So that's great. Further down, this is the foreign minister of Pakistan, who has said multiple times that he really has no idea what's going on in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, despite the fact that there are a number of Pakistani men with Uyghur wives who have disappeared. And then finally, on the farthest end of the spectrum that the Chinese government likes the best, is public support of Chinese government policies in this region. So it really runs the gamut, what countries have been saying and thinking. But let's also not forget that there are companies, too, involved in this region and that we buy products from every day. This is where I'm going to, without my notes, start to forget. Volkswagen has a facility in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. It's been there for a number of years. And this Volkswagen chief executive, Herbert Diess, continues to say to the media that he has not heard of what's going on and he really doesn't know anything about it, despite the fact that they are heavily involved there with the government. And here's a clothing label from a brand you might have heard of, Muzi, who proudly advertises that they get their cotton from Xinjiang. So there have been some examples of companies pulling out and stopping their supply chains going through Xinjiang. So a good example of this is Badger Sportswear. It was brought to their attention that some of their products were being made with forced labor in some of these forced labor camps that we were talking about. And they stopped their supply chain from going through there. But in a lot of other cases, companies are able to plead ignorance, say that they're unable to do due diligence. But I think the safest thing to do is, if you know a product comes from this region, it is safe to assume. The safest thing to do is assume it was made with forced labor, and particularly if it's cotton. 80% of the cotton produced in China comes from this region. So if you're buying cotton from China, the safest thing to do is assume it was produced in Xinjiang and it might have been made with forced labor. An NGO called the Fair Labor Association a couple weeks ago put out a report saying just this, and advising people that if they're concerned about this, to not buy cotton made from China. I personally don't do that anymore. And the real thing to bring home here is that products made with forced labor are in our supply chain, and we should all be aware of that. And now to the hardest question, which is why is the Chinese government doing this? And I'm going to tell you a bunch of things, but again, none of them are satisfactory on a human level. The Chinese government will tell you that they are countering terrorism, that they are countering religious extremism, that they are helping to modernize the region and the people, and that they are providing employment opportunities for all these people who otherwise wouldn't have jobs. But I think a much more accurate description is multifaceted. First, I think the most important thing to talk about is the Chinese Communist Party and its knee-jerk fear of anything that would give anyone a higher authority to look up to, right? So religion is a big one. They do not want anyone looking to their religion as a source of higher authority than the Chinese government, than the Chinese Communist Party itself. This is a knee-jerk reaction. It's not confined only to Islam, although Islam has a special place in the Chinese Communist Party fear, imagination. Secondly, people don't talk about this a lot, but I think it's really important, prejudice, racism. This is also happening because of a sense of cultural superiority. Thirdly, I think that a lot of people in the Chinese government have kind of drunk their own Kool-Aid on their terrorism narrative. Notably, before 9/11, the Chinese government used separatism and splitism. Splitism is the weirdest word, to talk about what was happening in the region. So anytime there's any unrest, it was because there were separatists or splitists trying to create an independent state. After 9/11, they got on board really quick with the global war on terror, and all of the rhetoric changed to terrorism. So I think that was probably a cynical move at the time. However, there are also human beings involved in the system, and human psychology being what it is. You say something enough and you start to believe it. I do think that there is some of that going on here. And I'm running out of time, so I'll just say really quickly. The current borders of the Chinese state are part of how the Chinese state builds its national narrative. It's really important that these borders are sacrosanct. They've always been that way. There's never been any different borders at all. This is the national myth making that they tell. So anything that might threaten that is very threatening to them. And then finally, as the Uyghur Tailor was talking about, this plays a big geostrategic role. It's right in the middle of the Belt and Road, where they're trying to build all these connections with other countries. And there's a lot of natural resources in the region that the Chinese government would like to have control over. That was really too fast, but.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of shocked. A lot going through my brain right now, trying to piece it together, and well, what do you know? We have a panel, so we are going to piece it together and kind of deconstruct what we've been talking about here. Reminders again, we've gotten some questions through the forums and stuff. It's just through the event page. So just as a reminder, we're going to have this panel, then we're going to have dinner right after. It's going to be not in this room, it's going to be in the room right next to this one. So you're not going to miss it. So just to frame the panel a little bit and just kind of to reflect on everything that we just talked about. A lot of information was just thrown at you, but just to kind of piece it all together, we went through the 5 W's. So we talked about the who, we talked about the what, the where, the when, and the why. And with all of that kind of information, we're going to kind of have a more broad conversation about things that might be more relevant. Hopefully, we'll get some audience input, and from there, we can really incorporate what the audience wants to hear more about. So let's get the panel party started. Cool. So thank you both so much for coming through. Really appreciate it. Taking the time out to share with everyone what your experiences have been. Really insightful. And I think that just, to start off, we're within the context of a university, pretty predominant one globally, not just one in the US. Can you talk a little bit about, the role that universities have taken, whether, here in the States or maybe more globally, what their approach has been?
Okay. Should I use this or not? Can everybody hear me? Okay, I'll continue to talk really loudly. Yeah, universities actually been really important. Number one, in doing events like this, which is really, really important to spread the word among their communities. But also, UCLA recently just passed a divestment divestment something that compels the university to get rid of any investments that they have that might be profiting from forced labor or other bad practices that we've just heard of. So I think that there's a lot of work that universities can do in that capacity, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in that, I'm happy to put you in touch with the UCLA folks who put that together.
Cool. Any other thoughts? on that?
I mean, they're not doing enough. And, I mean, I remember, like, you know, when I was in college and we worked really hard to get the school to divest investments in South Africa because of apartheid. I think that that you know, it would be great to see a broader student movement. I know that our national politics right now are kind of harrowing, but I think it would be really fantastic. I've worked with some human rights classes at Bard College and Sarah Lawrence College that are working with scholars at risk. So I think like the more students demand their schools listen and look at what's happening, that it would be great to have this movement of divestment. So yeah, UCLA is great, but it's one university in the whole country.
Right.
So yeah.
So talking about institutional power, organizational power, we talked about universities, but another pretty popular institutional power are governments. Mm-hmm. So specifically looking at the lens from Muslim countries, obviously I'd love to know more, maybe Jess, this is more directed for you, but love to know more about what the Muslim world's reaction has been, maybe not from a citizen level, but from institutional government level.
Yeah.
So I think, pretty sure it's on.
It's not a microphone, it's just
it is a microphone. Yeah. It's not just for looks. In general, I would say that it has not been as forceful a response as maybe some might hope. Turkey, for a while, was really outspoken about this, and then lo and behold, Erdogan had a meeting with Xi Jinping and magically reversed course, saying that they weren't going to get involved. There's been a couple of parliamentarians in Malaysia who keep bringing this up, but it is not really going many places in a lot of these countries. As I mentioned earlier, Pakistan's foreign minister is staunchly in the corner of the Chinese government, and a number of other governments are as well. I didn't have time to put this on the slide, but it's really notable that there was a couple of dueling statements that were issued in the UN over the last year, and the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, has twice signed on to these statements that are supporting what China is doing in the region, it's not been as forceful as one might hope. Is the polite way of saying it.
Okay, so collectively disappointed, probably. I don't really know what to say. I mean, I think there's a lot of disappointment going on for a number of reasons. So,
Do you want to use this?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So another thing. Did you want to add more?
I just want to
Please.
say one thing, which is like that I also think that sometimes it's hard to imagine that what's happening is happening. So like I went from Dubai to East Turkestan. So I went during Ramadan in Dubai, where you cannot even have water outside, to this region where it's forbidden to fast. You must eat. So, I mean, somehow I sometimes wonder, do people actually realize what's happening? And if they realize the level at which this oppression is happening, would the reaction be different?
I think actually a lot of the citizen level people are very concerned. It's the governments that are in no way interested in engaging. Yeah.
So, this kind of couples with another question I was thinking, which is just the kind of fear to speak out. So, this issue's been, obviously, it's not just started yesterday. So why hasn't it, kind of built this momentum? What are some of the feelings that, some Uyghur people are feeling that kind of justify their approach to this situation?
Do you want to answer this?
Yeah, sure. I think it's really...
The cute little mic.
Yeah, okay. So it's definitely a tough situation, but just knowing that thinking about the diaspora of Uyghurs, I would say, and knowing that whoever that is Uyghur, maybe we have some Uyghurs in our audience right now. So every one of them has family back in the region, and they probably haven't heard back, or they don't know if they're alive or not. So I think it's a really complex situation if you look through it in that perspective, but at the same time, there's not much you could do rather than just speak about it, and you just have to take your chances. And of course you want to be protected, and what I'm doing right now, I'm protecting my identity, but you really don't know, because the systematical oppression and how powerful the system is, it's very scary, but at the same time you have to be content and not be afraid to say something, because it's over, think about it, it's over 1 million people, and it's what, we said this wasn't going to happen, but it's literally happening again. What is this, a cycle of, like, it's not okay, concentration camps, you know? And I'll just mention this, is that okay?
Go ahead.
I went to Turkey to further my research about this because I was curious myself. I've never been in the region. And I spoke to this woman that has been detained. Her name is Gulbahar Jalilova. And I spoke to her, and I got the chance to interview her. She's been detained for 1.5 years. And she spoke about every little detail that she had to go through. And I'll just mention one part. Basically, she was from Kazakhstan, and she has Kazakhstan citizenship, but she's Uyghur. And which means she doesn't have Chinese passport or anything related to China. She's just Uyghur, but she's a Kazakh citizen. What happened with her situation is the Chinese government gave her a new identity, a new passport, claiming she's Chinese, and making her memorize the new identity of a Chinese citizen in the concentration camps while she was there. And she told me how every morning they would have to say their passport or their identity, and she would by accident say her Kazakh passport, and she would get in trouble for it because that's not who she is anymore. So she was given a new identity, and she's not it, you know. And that was very difficult to hear because they're forcing you to be this one nation, one identity, while they know that it's not true, you know, because we're different people, we're from a different culture. And like I said before in my presentation, Uyghurs are not Chinese. It's very different. So you can't. And I have to mention like Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau. Well, too late for Macau, but it's just like right now what's happening in Hong Kong. It's the same subject matter. So what are we going to do? Hong Kongers have the opportunity and they have the freedom to protest, but that's pretty much it.
So actually, piggybacking off of what you just mentioned about specifically Hong Kong or maybe other regions that are more internal to China, and I definitely want to open up a little bit and talk about the diaspora too, and kind of ask what diaspora Uyghurs have been doing, whether it's creatively or through the government systematically. But maybe starting off, if anyone can answer this, what has been the reaction in China? Are there people in different regions of China who are speaking up against this? Is there solidarity there? This is a question from the audience, so thank you for whoever asked it. But is there solidarity in the periphery?
In the periphery, in the heartland.
China's big.
Yeah, so there's definitely been some explicit solidarity among the Hong Kong protesters who have put up signs and mentioned like they do not want this to happen there. Largely, however, this is not really talked about in China. It's very, very hard to know what any given person thinks. China is a massive country. There's 1.4 billion people, so I am not speaking for everybody there. But this is not something that's talked a ton. It's not like on the nightly news all the time, right? So, and the Chinese internet is censored. So if you are looking for information about it from China, you're going to get the Chinese government version of what's going on there. And then also a lot of people, I mean, either there is a strong, a growing sense of Islamophobia in China generally over the last 5 to 10 years. So if people do know that people are being, put in camps and are being re-educated, they're learning Chinese, this is going to help their job prospects, but also like that's fine because like they're Muslim and that's a little bit scary. That is also a possible reaction. A lot of people probably don't know and probably don't care. Just like anywhere else, there's a ton of people here in the U.S. that aren't really paying attention to all the things, like horrible things that are happening here, right? And it's the same basically anywhere. A large part of the population is not informed and doesn't really care. There's a large part of the population that doesn't really understand. If they are informed, don't have all the facts. And no, there's not really a big movement of solidarity. And there wouldn't be a way to express it either.
So, Lisa, I want to come back to you about kind of creative diaspora and what they've been doing. But since we just mentioned it, kind of curious, like, what does the propaganda look like? Because I was just doing some quick.
The propaganda of the Chinese government.
Yeah, if we're talking about growing sense of Islamophobia and other things.
First of all, the Islamophobia and the racism against people in the region goes back very far. So it's really old, like I guess we could say centuries. But right, because like part of the language of who the Uyghur people are, savage. But when I went out there in 2002, and I told everyone I'm going out west, they were like, "Don't go. Those people are dangerous. They're pickpockets. Like you have to be careful." Everything that they said, I mean, I knew, I didn't believe it anyhow, but there was a ton of racism, and the propaganda network is a very highly funded, beautiful videos. So if anyone here Googles like what's happening to Uyghurs in China, you'll either find out what's happening or you'll get the propaganda version, which is like, oh, look at these beautiful new dances that people are doing, and look at this rapper, and he's like, there's a lot of support to what's happening in the region through propaganda. And there's also a lot of information about Uyghurs as terrorists. So there's a lot of focus on terrorist activity that's happening all over China. And Jessica could definitely talk more to that in terms of what's real and what's make-believe.
And actually, to perfectly frame that, I'm loving these questions that are coming in. So someone asked, how accurate are the terrorist claims? Has there indeed been a spike in extremist activity or people radicalized in neighboring countries returning to the region?
This is really complicated, and I'm going to give an unsatisfactory answer because I don't have 45 minutes to talk about this, so I'll just say that up front. The shortest possible way to say this is there indeed have been acts of what easily could be considered terrorism in the region over the last 20 or 30 years. Absolutely. All the best available evidence points to the fact that these are not large-scale, coordinated by some shadowy organization or being directed from outside the country. More importantly, there's many, 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 many other incidents, as the Chinese government refers to them, that they label as terrorism, which are almost certainly not terrorism. They are street fights. They are people trying to protest and maybe getting shot by the police themselves. They are people legitimately getting angry and trying to beat up a police officer or something, but that's not terrorism. That's frustration with, for example, I remember there was one Radio Free Asia article from a number of years ago where police officers forcibly entered someone's home and tried to take a woman's veil off in her own home. And then there was violence that resulted from that. That's not really a terrorist act. So the word terrorism is misapplied over and over and over again by the Chinese government. the fact that there have been terrorist incidents doesn't mean that everything that is happening there is terrorism, and it does not mean that there is some shadowy terrorist organization that is driving everything that's happening. I haven't seen clear and convincing evidence that there are large numbers of people that are being trained abroad and sent back. They're just, and if you look at the things that we would call terrorism, right? So there was an incident where 8 people went on a stabbing spree in a train station, actually outside the region. That does not take a lot of training abroad to come back and do, right? Like, that's not a technically thing that you would need to go get training for. So like none of the going abroad to get training and coming back narrative doesn't really make sense in terms of what's actually happening.
I think as an American, born American, I can definitely relate to the sense of, being blamed for these kind of reactions, but no one's ever really looking at like what the root cause of that might be. We see this a lot in our minority populations here. So going back to some of the creative folks, whether that's internally within the region or kind of throughout the diaspora globally, actually I'd like to focus more on the region specifically. So is there a creative voice? Like, is there like an underground? Is it totally silenced? Like, what is it? Because I think you look at revolutions around the world, and typically music, beautiful art comes out of it. What's that like there?
Everyone that's made art or work that's in resistance to what's happening is now interned. So you won't find resistance right now. What we've seen, and I don't know if this is art, is TikTok videos where people have stood in front of the camera with photographs of their parents or siblings that have been disappeared, just like looking at the picture and looking into TikTok. And there's also, until the government shut that down, there was also a number of videos that came out where people were beating their heart, both like from the diaspora and inside the country in TikTok, where they were just like crying and like beating their heart. They're really powerful to see, but you really can't, and like the kind of resistance that people got in trouble for was like promoting like the preciousness of Uyghur language. It wasn't like, we are East Turkestan. You never hear that within the region. Everyone's like afraid to say that because you'll get in trouble. So outside in the diaspora, there is an online camp album project. There's a lot of people in the diaspora that are trying to speak out. As Aziza said, there's a huge part of the Uyghur diaspora that are terrified to speak out because of their family members. So it's one of these really complicated scenarios where we don't know what it feels like to have parents there or siblings there. And a lot of people are frustrated because they want everyone to speak out from the diaspora. So it's really tricky. I mean, people are just, have nightmares every night. I have like a friend that is like cries herself to sleep because her whole family's there. And she can't speak, because if she speaks, just the idea of one of her family members getting incarcerated, and some have been, is just too terrifying. So it's really tricky. But people are beginning to, there's more and more art coming out of people in the diaspora, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's always important historically. So it's just really interesting to see how China is suppressing that, and so, the consequences of it. And I think Jessica, you mentioned this, but this is for both of you really. When you see someone who's quote unquote freed, you hear these stories. People have been kind of like let go of from the camps. What does freedom actually mean?
Yeah.
Whether that's like internally in the region or even globally.
Yeah. This is actually a really good question. This weekend, I don't know if any of you saw it, there was another government document that leaked. And it was from one county in the region, and it listed a large number of people, why they had been sent to a camp, how long they were there, and then for a number of them that they had been released. However, the vast majority of those who had been released had been sent to forced labor in factories. So freedom from these camps a lot of times means it is just incarceration by another name. if you do get released, and some people do genuinely get released, not a lot, but some of them do, you're right back in the surveillance system that we talked about. There are cameras everywhere. Your phone is spying on you. You have to have all these apps on your phone. They check and make sure so that they can keep tabs on you. You are not free. And a lot of times you, marked as someone who has been in a camp, are not allowed into public spaces. You can't go into that market. You can't enter that building. So you are functionally in a very narrow world of house arrest, even though you're technically free. And people who have made it out. I mean, there was one woman who helped leak documents, and she's been getting death threats. The reason that she ended up revealing her identity is because she thought it was safer to do so. She had been getting calls saying that we're going to kill you and put you in these trash bags. So it is not, you may be free, you may make it out, but they're still watching you.
There was a young man that was in the New York Times piece, and his parents were released a week before, because he called the county police and said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to speak out publicly. This is your last warning. And they actually released his parents, so he wasn't in the video. But he said when he did finally speak to his parents, it was like they never disappeared. They never mentioned like, oh son, we haven't seen you in 2 years. They were just like, because they're being surveyed while they're speaking, so they just can say like, hello, how are you? How's your job? And that's it. Like he couldn't say like, you look skinny, you look terrible, where have you been? I miss you, like nothing. It's just like, it like never happened. It's really painful. It was really painful for him. I mean, great that they were out, but like Jessica's saying, the level of out is different.
Yeah, and I think what's tough about that is like it doesn't necessarily just affect people who were born and raised in that region even. It's people who are descendants of Uyghur folks, so even if they have connections to people who are in that region, they also, this fear is very, very, it permeates very wide. So yeah, I can't imagine what that experience is like, just even as someone who might not necessarily have a direct connection to someone there. Maybe they have distant cousins or something, but still to constantly feel under the grip of a government that's not even in front of you. Someone asked a really, really great question. So, as an autonomous region of China, has Xinjiang presented a real secessionist threat to the unified Chinese state? Is the region opposed to the Belt and Road Initiative? Are economic gains from the Belt and Road Initiative to be shared with the region? Has there been an actual Uyghur, well, we kind of spoke about that, but an actual Uyghur terrorist threat? I think more so about the economic impact of the Belt and Road. Do they benefit from it? Is there any type of agreement on a political level?
I guess I'm answering, okay. There's certainly money that flows back into the region from the Belt and Road. Who that goes to in the region is a completely different question, because I'll let you take a guess who runs a lot of the industry and other institutions that are benefiting from the Belt and Road. It's not largely run by Uyghurs or other ethnic minority Muslims. So it's not that there's no money coming into the region. There's lots of money coming into the region. It's that it doesn't go down to the population in a way that might make sense given what who is in the population. I remember the first time I ever went to the region, and I had spent a long day in a car with a very nice man who drove me around, and he pointed around and said, look at all these oil drills. They just take all the money, all the oil, and they take all the money, and we get nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the money is evenly shared with the people to whom the region originally belonged. So, the fact that all this natural gas and oil was found in the desert, and it's one of the wealthiest regions in China that has yet to have all its minerals and whatnot taken out of the land. So, I mean, the people that are from there are not the people that are benefiting, right. Including like new housing. I mean, there's benefits here and there, but a lot of the new housing is forced. People are forced to move. traditional Uyghur housing, different than the hutang, which was the traditional Uyghur housing is so much to do with the culture. So the business was there, the way that the house was set up. I have a friend that was an architect and wrote a lot about this. So the destruction of the homes also had a huge effect on the culture.
Cool, thank you. So kind of back to my introduction where I kind of just opened up the discussion for tonight. I mentioned, you hear all these buzzwords, China's in the news for this, China's in the news for that. One of the topics right now that I think we're all aware of is the coronavirus and how that's, kind of had a global impact. Is there any relation with, this virus and the Uyghur population? Is this something that's impacting them? Is this something that's, top of mind? What is the relationship there, if there is one?
Sure. Yeah, I think the real problem with coronavirus generally is lack of transparency, right? Like we don't really know what's happening, and I don't personally trust all of the numbers that the government's giving. This is compounded even further in the Uyghur region, right? Because we know that there are cases in the Uyghur region. The real concern is that some of this infection gets into a camp, and in some of these camps, the conditions are such that it would be very easy for it to spread. And especially with a lot of these people, if they have not been fed adequately or they're not being taken care of, immune systems are going to be low and they're going to be especially susceptible to getting the coronavirus. But again, we know of a set number of cases in certain places, but there's just no real transparency about what's happening.
No, I keep thinking I want to end on a positive note.
Well, I'll give it to you then. So
I don't know what it is.
A lot of people mentioned or asked, they mentioned specific organizations, but just generally speaking, there's a lot of interest or, moving to action here. So, what are things people can do? What are organizations that exist within New York? Maybe, NYU's, I'm sure there's people in this room who are not just from New York, but across the world and across the states. So, prominent organizations that are speaking up for Uyghur people, or there are organizations that are taking funding, programs like this, just so many other things I could think of, but I'm pretty sure this audience would really appreciate to hear what they can do in the near future.
You want me? Okay. Sorry, I feel like you guys just have to keep listening to me talk. So number one, I think we talked about divestment. I think that's really important. That's something that everybody who's a part of this community at NYU could be working on. Truly do call your senator. I know everybody says that, but there is a bill working its way through Congress. It's kind of moving along in fits and starts, but it's mostly just stopped right now. It'd be really, really helpful for people to call their congressman and let them know that this is an issue that they care about. Sorry? I believe it's the Uyghur Human Rights Act.
It was around December 17th, I believe, when it was passed, but then...
It's only through the House, right? It hasn't gone through the Senate.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's passed the House and it still has to pass the Senate.
Hong Kong did, though.
Yeah, Hong Kong went through. So it really does make a difference if you call. What were the other things that I should mention? There's more.
You can make testimonies.
Yes.
Online, like the one that I made. There's a pretty amazing database, shahidbiz.org or
Shahid.biz.
Shahid.biz. A scholar and activist, Jean Bunin, has collected over 7,000 testimonials by family members and friends that are speaking out and adding to the victim database who it is that has disappeared, why they've disappeared, what their Chinese ID are. The reason that I put my passport is for every testimonial, people put their Chinese ID, so that this is not, it's full disclosure for this particular website. So you could actually go on the website, find someone that you relate to, and just create a TikTok video or an Instagram or a video on Facebook. Just get the word out, let more people know. I mean, the best thing that could happen is to let more people know what's happening through social media. Like this young woman, we all want to be able to do what she did in like a hot second. I don't know if any of you have seen the She pretends she's doing her makeup, and she tells the whole history of actually what's happening right now in the region, and in like 30 seconds. And it went,
She's so amazing.
it went viral. Sorry, and then was shut down off of TikTok for a while. But the more people speak about what's happening, the less it will be ignored. And when you're one of a handful of people speaking out, when you know the people that want to speak out can't really speak out, like this is one time that it's okay to kind of like speak for other people. Like often, like it's really politically incorrect to do that, but here it's really important to do that. So I know we have so many domestic issues going on, but if you can, like, that's doing a testimonial is really important, or just speaking out online. Doing anything to kind of annoy the Chinese government is good, just so they know, like, it's not okay and people are paying attention. Art, like, yeah, I mean, I'm part of this collective, but Jess is also part of a collective, and we're in September creating a immersive theater piece together with 10 other artists, both Uyghur and American and French, and to give, but rather than just reading articles all the time, we wanted to kind of give people like a bodily experience of what it means to be going through this situation. So it's kind of a crazy idea, but we're actually doing it. So make art, you can send, like, yeah, make art. I mean, art just hits people on a whole other level. Like, this is great to talk to everyone and to communicate, but I just find, like, through performance and visual art and music and fashion,
Politics.
that, what else can people do?
I think you can raise awareness about forced labor in the supply chain. There's been a lot of really good reporting about this on the Wall Street Journal. They've been really clear about what companies are benefiting from the supply chain, and you can both boycott. Like I said, I don't buy cotton from China anymore because I don't know how it was made. You can do that personally, but also, again, spreading the word online, like, don't buy cotton from China anymore. Avoid these companies because they're sourcing their cotton from there or other products from there. I think that's really important as well.
I don't know why we haven't, like, yet done a movement against Muji, because
Yeah.
it's so, like, specific. It's on the label,
Yeah.
and it's so easy for people to come together and just say, like, it's not okay. Yeah, so.
And interestingly, fun fact, TikTok's owned by Tencent, which is a Chinese company.
Yes.
If folks didn't know that. Her face.
That's why Feroz Aziz, who made that amazing video, the eyelash curling video, got banned. That's why. Because the Chinese government.
And they claim that the Chinese government has no influence on the content on that platform, but, So also, instead of action and moving, towards, something that we can do tangibly, on the back of the flyers that hopefully everyone here has, there's a QR code. Most of your cameras should be able to just view the QR code, and then they'll open up a link, whether it's iPhone or Android. A lot of links. Yeah, there's a lot of content in there, so hopefully that can be, a better source for you.